Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. My name is Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and joining me for a general chat about podcasting are my friends Sam Wheatley and Jen Longworth. Is it? Yes?
Longworth, yes. Yep.
I just know you as Jen. How are you both, Sam?
Doing well.
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Yep.
How are yourself?
Not bad. Getting used to this over time. Yep. How are you doing, Jen? How are you keeping over there with, things as they are?
Things as they are. It is what it is, just like everybody else. Just kind of plodding my way through it.
So, first of all, Jen, how were you introduced to the world of podcasting?
Oh, how was I introduced to the world of podcasting? I was in radio, and we were recording our shows anyway, and the general manager was like, hey, get us on iTunes. So I figured out how to get what we were already doing onto iTunes, and then went, oh, this is cool. Wait a minute, I can do this on my own. And then I branched out, and that small station sold, and I became a freelance podcast editor. So I do more of the tech stuff than the actual listening. I listen to the shows I get paid for, and then I listen to podcasts about podcasting.
So were you listening to podcasts before you started actually doing them, or was it based on the radio station asking you to do that?
Mostly the radio station. I was familiar with podcasts, but wasn't a big listener. And the shows I started with, my kid introduced me to, actually, some that I like. So those will probably come up in conversation, being that they're the few podcasts and not about podcasting I listen to. But no, I wasn't a real listener because I worked in radio. I was listening to shows all the time, Yep.
What about yourself, Sam? Where did you start listening to a podcast?
Well, it stems from my father, really. I used to listen to AM radio a lot, which, as you know, Martin, in England, is mainly talk radio stations, which was the podcast of old before podcast actually existed. And then by accident, really, I'm a big boxing fan, and I was invited onto a podcast about boxing, and it just stemmed from there, really. That's where my history comes from. And then obviously I've branched out from there, and now I listen to a whole variety of different podcasts, not just sport. But basically that's where it all started. It came from my father, and then built from there.
Okay. What shows over the years then have you particularly, been attracted to listening to, Jen?
My big ones are Welcome to Night Vale, a popular audio drama, and Lore. Those are the two non-podcasting ones. And then if you're into podcasting like I am, School of Podcasting and She Podcasts are up there.
Okay. What do you listen to, Sam?
Well, I'm a big fan of the Joe Rogan podcasts. I think that the fact that he covers such a wide array of subjects from one podcast to the next. So there's always something in there for someone, even if one day he's talking about something that you don't particularly have any interest in. The next day he could be talking about something that you absolutely love. I also like sports podcasts. There's Peter Crouch's podcast on the BBC, the Nut House Boxing podcast I love as well. They're the main three, really. Plus, there's the podcast, Russell Brand's podcast as well. I do like, which is all about really existentialism and self-improvement and spirituality. That's another favourite of mine.
Okay. How do you listen to those shows, Sam, and where do you listen to them, and when?
Well, sometimes I like to listen to them at night, not falling asleep, but just before I sleep. It would be like maybe 25 years ago reading a book before you go to sleep. But I also like to listen to them on the train at home, on the way home from work or to work, or at lunchtime, just generally through my phone, either on YouTube or Spotify or any of the other platforms that they're available on. That's my main time and way to listen.
Okay. How about yourself, Jen? When do you listen to them? Where and how do you listen to them?
Well, I primarily listen through the Amazon Alexa dot. I don't want her to respond.
No, you don't.
So I usually have them played through my smart speaker, either like Sam said, right before bed, or if I'm eating by myself or cleaning or something like that, while I'm doing something else. And I totally neglected to mention my favorite podcast that I listen to every night. Hello, Sleep With Me, the podcast that puts me to sleep. Instead of just listening before bed, his idea is to distract you so that you quit listening to all your thoughts and you listen to his stories and you fall asleep. So I listen to that and I set a sleep timer and through my smart speaker. If I'm listening to the car, I use the Bluetooth in my car too, but I had a wreck by listening to an audiobook, so I try to stick with music in the car now.
Okay, that's good.
Wow. Yep. Jennifer, regards the sleep podcast, I'm somebody that I sleep heavily, but I struggle to get to sleep. Would you recommend that then?
Absolutely.
As a good podcast.
Absolutely.
Okay, I will definitely.
And he has one called Sleep to Strange, which kind of is the story, only it's from 4+ years ago episodes, but it skips the ads. So if you want an easy way to start and try it out, they're a little bit different than the more recent ones. But if you start it for the first time and go, what is all these ads? Because it's a sleep podcast. You got to put the sponsors at the beginning because we're all going to fall asleep, right? Skip the ads and get to the story and see how it goes for you. But yeah, I started listening to that back in like 2016 or before and listen nearly every single night and don't very often make it to the end.
That's a very good. That does a very good job then. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where to go with myself for listening to podcasts because as everybody that knows me, I listen to all sorts of podcasts and I listen to a lot of them. Why do you think podcasts have suddenly recently become so popular? Do you think it's to do with the pandemic that's going on at the moment, or do you just think that it's natural that it's gone that way? Jen?
I don't think it's a new thing of them being popular. No. I think people were looking for that initially when the pandemic happened. It was in the discussions in the industries like, oh, how is this going to affect us? And really people didn't see much of a difference as far as current listener stats changing for current podcasters. Now, everybody wants to be a podcaster now since they're stuck at home. So I think that's something having to do, maybe more with the pandemic. But as far as the popularity and listening, I haven't gotten the vibe that it's changed that much.
No, but you've definitely got more people that have got involved, sort of like celebrities, for instance. All of a sudden, you've got a slew of celebrities that have their own podcast shows that have started recently, like the David Tennants and all these other people. That's an interesting change.
Yeah. Well, I think people are appreciating the medium for what it is too. Like, oh, wait, this isn't going anywhere. This wasn't just a fluke. It's been around for 15 years or whatever, and it's not going anywhere. Maybe we need to finally get in on it.
Yeah. What do you think, Sam?
Well, I think podcasts, especially through the mediums of which they're available, I believe it's a sign of today's world. You can listen while you're on the move, while you're working, and while you're doing activities, whether it be around the house, as we are now with the pandemic, or outside. You're going for a jog. You can put a podcast on while you're going for a jog. I think it's it's an indication of the way the world's going. Everything's faster, and I think I do believe that it helps people, and it has been helping people for years now, as Jen says. I think it helps you slow down in a fast world.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that because you can concentrate on something, a conversation for an hour or 2 hours, or however long a podcast lasts, that podcast in particular. I believe it's something the way you can zone out the fast paced, lots of information world, and just relax and listen to a conversation, and many times feel part of that conversation, even though you aren't actually interacting with anyone.
Yep, absolutely. I also think that it's a bit like the old days with radio, where you could do something else while you're listening to somebody in the background, and it's almost like you've got company there in the background while you're making bread, or you're doing the ironing or something. It's company there, and you can do other things at the same time. Whereas if it's television or a medium like that, you've got to give it your entire attention. You've got your eyes, your ears, and everything is zoned in on that. Whereas you can do other things with radio and podcast. I think you've also got the thing that you can listen to that whenever you like, as opposed to the normal old-fashioned radio system where you had to actually have that radio on at that time to listen to that program that you want to listen to.
Well, that's why I think that podcasts are like they're like the evolution of the old AM radio, talk radio stations. It's like an evolution. Before, obviously, you would have to tune in from, say, 2 to 4 p.m. to get the program you want. Now, you don't have to just tune in at that hour. It's there, it's recorded, it's up in the internet forever. And when you want to listen to it, you can listen to it. I absolutely agree. It's like having company without having company. And especially during this pandemic, I think that from a mental point of view, I think that helps people, because there's a lot of people that would have been stuck in lockdown on their own. There's lots of people that live on their own, and I think listening to a podcast, whichever they choose to listen to, would somewhat negate that loneliness that they might feel otherwise.
Yeah, agreed. What do you think, Jen?
Well, a couple things that he hit on in thinking about the Infinite Dial research of US podcasts back in 2019. They asked the people, like, why do you listen to podcasts? And one of the top 10 answers was companionship. Yep. I'm lonely. I need someone to hang out with me. Hey, let me get Scoots for Sleep With Me, or Jess and Elsie from She Podcasts, or Dave Jackson, or whatever, to join me while I eat, or while I'm, doing whatever. That's one of the reasons I listen. So I absolutely agree with that.
I think what helps matters as well is the fact that there's always something for everybody there. There's a subject where if you've got something that you're interested in, you'll more than likely find a show that's there for you. I mean, I found this. If you're into the music of the Beatles, there are so many podcasts to choose from, that you can listen to. You can listen to this, and this, and there's always something there for somebody. If you like knitting, there's probably somebody that does a podcast all about knitting.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I would absolutely agree with that. That the fact that there's such a wide range of subjects covered in podcasts, not in one singular podcast, but all the podcasts, is so much covered. I think everybody would find something that they would enjoy listening to.
And I think when I talk to people who want to start new podcasts, and you ask them, like, well, who do you want to have listen? And they say everyone. No, that's not the answer. You don't want everybody to listen. You got to be real specific. And that's the beauty of podcasting, is you can niche down to as tiny of a demographic, whatever you want to get to, knitting, but knitting for cats, knitting with cats, knitting near cats. It can be as specific as you want it to be, and you're still going to find the people who are going to listen. They're going to find you, especially if you're, you mentioned boxing and sports, and you're in the fandom that surrounds that anyway. You're probably conversing with other people, and the top way podcasts are spread is by word of mouth. So that's, you get into your niche group and you find the people who are knitting for cats, and you tell them about your show, and they tell other people, and they tell other people, and that's how it spreads. So, yep.
Absolutely.
Well, as I say for myself, I mean, there's so many episodes from, say, Joe Rogan's podcast, for example, that I could name you now, with Randall Carlson, for example, and he studied the Younger Dryas period of history, and ice sheets melting and sea level rises around 12,000 years ago, and it's led to some really interesting theories. Now, under usual circumstances, that's not something that I'd listen to, but now I'm like really interested in it. It's like always on my mind during the day, and I'm like, well, did that really happen? And I think that's such a great way that podcasts can influence us and expand our ideas and our points of view on the work. Whereas, although we don't like to admit it, we have quite narrow points of view about subjects. Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to take in information. And I think listening to podcasts has helped me broaden my my horizons, if you like, in terms of information that I'm willing to accept and use to help not just increase my knowledge of a subject, but to just take that subject in and make it part of what I believe and the part of who I am. I think it's an amazing thing that podcasts can do. From something really simple as well, something as simple as two people talking and you listening to that conversation, and your whole outlook and your whole perspective on the subject can be flipped 180 degrees, and it's amazing, and that's something that I only used to really get when I was younger, as I say, listening to like talk radio stations with my father, and I think it's a great way to get reliable information as well, because you can, obviously Google's there, you can get on Google, you just type in a guest's name and then all their qualifications and everything are there. You know that you're verifying this person knows what they're talking about, and so you get the so this person's reliable, and it absolutely, you listen to a certain person and you absolutely become, it's kind of obsessed with a subject and expanding your knowledge and your ideas, and for me that's really a big joy that I get out of listening to podcasts, whether it be yours, Martin, whether it be anyone else's. I think it's amazing, it's brilliant. I can't really because as you probably know, Martin, Jennifer, you probably don't know, English has been my second language for about 11 years now, so I'm struggling to think of the superlative to accurately describe how it makes me feel. But sometimes I listen to a subject and afterwards I feel kind of elated. I feel like I've awoken about a subject that I thought I knew things about, but now actually I do know about. And that leads me to go on and research myself more into that subject. And I think in a world of fake news and quick sound bites, I think it's such a great thing to have, because you go back to, I know it's the electronic equivalent, but it's the electronic equivalent of going to the library and actually researching something through books. after you've listened to a podcast, rather than just taking a soundbite and right, I believe that, and I will always believe that.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I was saying to these chaps I've talked to today on this podcast about that, where, I mean, most people know that I'm not particularly that much into sports, but they were doing a show where, because I was listening for research purposes, I listened to one where they talked to a manager of a team that's out in the Caymans and training a soccer team, and I'm not particularly that interested in soccer, but it was interesting because they made it interesting. So, like you said, sometimes you might come across something you'll listen to and think, actually, that's more interesting than I thought it would have been the first time when I was looking at it initially and not sure about it.
And then there's shows like 99% Invisible, which, like, the whole point is, they've researched stuff, or with Laura, they've researched stuff because it was interesting enough to the host. And they got excited enough about that topic that they went out and researched it, and now are presenting what they found to you, and then you can get excited about it, and we're all just going to be happy.
Absolutely.
I think that's a big thing about listening to podcasts. I think when you can tell that the host is genuinely excited and interested in the subject of that said podcast, I think that helps exponentially your listening experience. Because it's one thing, some podcasts can sound like somebody's reading off a sheet of paper, whereas others, they've gone into research that subject and research the guest, and their interest piques my interest as much as anything.
Yeah.
Regardless of the subject.
Definitely. I mean, it's not the time to say it yet, but from what you've said already, it reminds me of a point that somebody I was talking to the other week for one of the other shows said to me, that always remember that if you're doing a show and you yourself are starting to get bored, then so will the listener. So move along and go to the next bit.
Yeah, I tell people that the length of a podcast, that's one of the most common questions I get as an editor and producer and coach, is how long should my podcast be? And the answer is as long as it takes to tell the story. Yeah. And if you can get the story told in 4 minutes, you don't need to go any longer than that. But if you're Joe Rogan and you need a little bit more than 4 minutes, then keep on going.
I can't remember what it was, but somebody was telling me about a podcast about history. And
hardcore history.
Yep, and that is they're an average of 4 hours per episode or something, because they go really deep into it. Yep.
Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. That's the one.
That's the one. Yep.
I think I can relate that, Martin. Just as yourself and myself, we produce our own music. If I'm making a piece of music and I don't enjoy that piece of music, I won't force that music on other listeners, on potential listeners, because if I don't like it, who else is going to like it? I think you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to like what you're doing yourself. Otherwise, it will come across. It will come across whether in your music, in your podcast, in any walk of life. I believe that. If you're not interested in what you're doing, then the quality of the product or the quality of the task you're doing won't be the same as if you were like interested in that subject.
Well, we're all from a musical background because Jen does Form and 5090 as well. Those songwriting challenges that I do each year as well.
I just do Form, and I haven't been active in it in a while, but I still peek in, see what's going on, see how people are doing. But yeah, that's how we met.
That's true.
Was songwriting challenge.
Yep. And as mentioned before recording, I met Sam because he went to school with my younger brother. And then
Very cool.
and then all
Yes,
all of
that's
his
great.
all of his music's come from me introducing him to all these different bands when he was younger that he probably shouldn't have been
Yes,
listening to.
Well, yeah. When I met Marv, I was listening to basically popular music, chart music, and he introduced me to like the big one that stands out was Fishbone, the ska band. I mean, that's pigeonholing them a little bit, but and I can remember I was like 14, 15 years old, and he introduced me to Fishbone, and my mind was totally blown. I was like, I've never heard music like this before. And I've always had an interest in music. I've always played guitar. I've played guitar since before I was a teenager. But that just Marv getting me into Fishbone more than any other group just made me want to be a musician, whether it be professionally, whether it be on my own, or just me sat in a bedroom with a tape recorder, just recording anything. Just I wanted to be able to create something musically, and I actually am. I've never told you that, Marv, but I'm actually hugely indebted to you for that introduction into that sort of into that world of music. Even though, as I say, I was already playing music, I didn't have the motivation or anything to create music. I was just happy, just strumming along 3 chords to a song. But then, as soon as I heard Fishbone, like my mind was open to it. It was amazing. It was a great experience. I'll never forget the first day I heard Party at Ground Zero when you played it for me. It changed my life forever.
Wow, that's brilliant. But that's like you were saying though, with the podcast world, where you've got an open mind now to what you'll listen to, and I think that's the same with podcasting and with music now for you and for all of us, I think.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many different genres in music and in podcasting too, that if you I don't like podcasts. Well, what did you listen to? Well, just this one thing with this guy talking. Okay, well, try something else, because there's solo shows, there's interview shows, there's comical shows, there's radio dramas, there's so many different choices. I have, as an editor, I had some people who are obviously scripted, obviously to me scripted. They just sound like they're brilliant speakers when I'm done with them. But then people who are talking off the top of their heads, I have interviews, so don't give up if you don't find what you like right away too. So Marv, you could be introducing Sam to his next favorite podcast too, just like his next favorite album that he's going to jam out to. Okay, maybe it's the next podcast he's going to subscribe and binge listen to.
Well, yeah.
Well,
go on.
Oh, apologies. No, I was going to say I don't just listen to podcasts that I like now. Although, what I mean is I don't listen now just to podcasts that have opinions in them and that I necessarily agree with. I mean, I listen to Ben Shapiro's podcast because I think he's a terrific speaker, and he's brilliant at getting his point across. And although I don't necessarily agree with him politically, I always like to think that I'd get both sides of an argument or of a debate before reaching my own conclusion. And I think his podcasts are superb. I think all the stuff that he does with The Wire, I believe it's called, his network. Yeah. Although I don't agree politically with his ideologies, he's such an interesting guy and he's such a great speaker that he's hard not to listen to. And I think that goes along with a bit Jennifer's point, where someone's passionate about that subject, then it's going to hook you in, even though you might not necessarily agree with what they're talking about on that subject.
Yeah, but then picking up from another point that Jen came up with was, on Facebook, I mentioned about podcasters up to on there, and somebody responded saying that they tried listening to one show and about where they talked to a songwriter or musician, I think it was, and they kept listening to it, and they said that they just found it boring because it was all talk. And I said, well, don't leave it there. There are other shows where it looks at that. It's the same sort of thing. Like I said to them one that I listened to, which is called The Strange Brew. And that one is the same sort of format, but it's broken up by them actually playing songs by that person that they're talking to. So it's talk about the song or where they were at this point in the career, then the song, then they talk a bit more than that. So that breaks it up for those people. So like I said, there's always something for everybody. So if you want a show where there's not so much music and it's just all talk, you can find that. But if you want one where they're talking about music and then playing the music, there's those as well. So like I said, there's something there for everybody.
What I won't understand with that is, with your friend, is that would you read one page from one book, not like it, and then never read books again? You wouldn't. And that's the same with podcasts. Why would you listen to just 1 hour of one podcast and say, I don't like it, podcasts aren't for me? There's such a wide variety of books, there's such a wide variety of podcasts. Why would you treat the two differently when essentially, although podcast is spoken word, it's the same thing? You should approach it with the same thing. Just because I didn't like the start of this book doesn't mean I'm never going to read for the rest of my life. And that seems to me quite narrow-minded.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Jen, what advice have you got for people starting out in podcasting?
Well, if you're going to get started in podcasting, know what you're going to talk about for more than just like 2 episodes, because people get real passionate about a topic, but then, okay, now what I'm going to say. So brainstorm out 52 ideas of what you could possibly talk about in your show. And that would give you 1 a week for a year. Now, that doesn't mean you have to record 1 a week for a year, but at least it forced you to sit down with a pen and paper and actually write them down and come up with ideas. And then as you go through, you can use those. You don't have to use those, but it shows you if you have a good idea or not. Because if you can't come up with more than 5 things to say about a topic, then maybe you'd be a better guest on someone's podcast instead of having your own. And I'm not an expert on guesting, so I'm sorry, I don't have any tips on that. But just to get your idea out. And the second for getting started that came up with a client and I recently was about naming your show and wanting to make sure that you're not choosing a name that's already taken.
Okay.
So that is as simple as a Google search and an iTunes/Spotify search. And if you can't find it in any of those places, then it's probably not taken, especially if you can also get the .com. bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com is me. You know, if you go out to GoDaddy or whoever and look for the domain name and it's already taken, you might check to see if there's a podcast related to it. So those are my 2 tips for early beginners just getting started, because you got to have a name for your show and make sure it's not already taken. And don't make it too clever so that people can't remember. But you can be clever. I know people like to be clever. So be clever, but not too clever. If that makes sense. Be memorable. That's what you should.
Okay. That makes sense. Yep.
Would potentially there be legal problems with name clashes in podcasts then? Even if it was on an unintentional error on your part of picking a name that was chosen?
Yes, there can be. A topic comes up from time to time. Should you trademark your name? And if you have the budget for it, yeah, go ahead and trademark your name so that you're there first and you have it. But if you're there first, and someone else comes along and you find out they took your name, you can say like, hey, I was here first. Please quit using my name. And hopefully they say, oh, sorry, my bad, and change it. But if you have the trademark, you can be like, hey, look, not just I was here first, but I own this. Get out of my way. But usually if you can get the .com, you're pretty safe. But you don't want to make it too close to some famous one either, because then you're like, if you're the Joe Rogan fan podcast, be like, it's kind of, I don't know if you should do that.
Yeah, it's kind of piggybacking off of his name, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. I had that exact same problem when I was starting this. It took us a long time to find a name for this podcast, and it actually ended up being Louise who actually came up with the name for my other half, who came up with the name, which I think fits.
Very nice.
Right. Mm-hmm. Anyway, thank you both of you for the chat, and I'll look forward to chatting to you both again soon. And thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That's all right. I'll catch you both again soon.
Yes, what I'm going to do is when I'm not speaking, I will mute my mic so that the buzz goes away.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it should be easy to edit out as well.
Yeah. Like Jen's just said, it's going to be all separate files anyway, so when I come to edit it all together, I'll be able to take you out of when there's bits where you're not involved, maybe. Anyway, to get rid of that.
Okay, no problem.
And I can single out the sound anyway and sweeten it a bit and lower it down in the mix anyway.
Well, apologies, because I don't know what the problem is. I would have to have a closer look.
Could be a lot of things. Could be the cord, could be the connection, could be the machine, could be,
Okay, let's go for this then, shall we?